She clutched her resume, hope flickering in her eyes, only to be harshly shoved aside by a dismissive employee. 10 minutes later, the CEO SEP's unexpected offer changed her entire world. Jessica Davis clutched her meticulously printed resume, the paper already dampening slightly in her nervous grip as she approached the imposing glass doors of Sterling Corp. Hope, a fragile butterfly, fluttered in her chest. This was it, her last chance, the culmination of weeks of fruitless searching. She smoothed down her slightly worn but clean blouse and took a deep breath, the scent of industrial cleaner and expensive air freshener filling her nostrils as she pushed open the heavy door and stepped into the cavernous, intimidatingly sleek lobby. Polished marble floors reflected the cool, bright lights, and the hushed efficiency of the place made her feel small, insignificant. She spotted a large, modern reception desk, and behind it, a woman with sharply styled blonde hair was talking animatedly on a headset. Jessica waited patiently for a moment, then took a tentative step forward. The receptionist, whose name tag read Tiffany Scott, finally ended her call with a theatrical sigh and glanced up, her eyes, the color of icy blue, flicking over Jessica with blatant disapproval. Before Jessica could even utter a polite, "Excuse me, I was wondering if you're accepting applications for any open positions," Tiffany cut her off, her voice as sharp as her manicure. "We're not hiring. And definitely not walk-ins." The words were like a slap. Jessica felt her cheeks flush. "Just ask politely. Maybe there's an HR contact," she thought, trying to keep her voice steady. "Oh, I see. Could I perhaps leave my resume with you or get an email address for human resources?" she managed, offering a hopeful, nervous smile. Tiffany scoffed, a small, cruel sound. Tiffany rolled her eyes dramatically. "Look, I don't have time for this. We're a major corporation, not a charity. There are no jobs for you here." She gestured dismissively towards the door. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual work to do." The finality in her tone was crushing. Jessica's carefully constructed composure began to crumble. "Don't cry, not here," she pleaded with herself. She could feel the gaze of a few people milling about the lobby, their interest piqued by the receptionist's raised voice. Humiliation, hot and sharp, pricked at her skin. Her hand, still clutching the resume, trembled. This was worse than just a no. It was a brutal, personal rejection. Before we continue with the story, be sure to let us know where you're watching from and what time it is in the comments. We love learning about our viewers. Now let's get back to the story. Jessica tried to speak again, to salvage some dignity, to make one last plea. "Please, if you could just—" But Tiffany interrupted her again, her voice rising in irritation. "Are you deaf? I said no. Now move along." You step blocking the reception area. As Jessica hesitated, still reeling from the harshness, Tiffany stood up slightly and with a deliberate, impatient movement, reached across the counter and pushed Jessica's arm, the one holding the resume. It wasn't a violent shove, but it was forceful enough, demeaning enough, to make Jessica stumble back a step, her balance momentarily lost. The contact was cold, dismissive. The resume, her beacon of hope, slipped from her stunned fingers. The single sheet of paper, holding all her qualifications, her work history, her desperate plea for a chance, fluttered to the polished marble floor. It landed face up, her name staring back at her from the cold, indifferent surface. The sound of the paper hitting the floor seemed to echo in the sudden silence of that part of the lobby. Jessica stared at it, a fresh wave of humiliation washing over her. She didn't have to do that, Jessica thought, her mind numb. She didn't have to be so cruel. The disdain on Tiffany's face was clear, an arrogant smirk playing on her lips as she watched Jessica's distress. Tears pricked at Jessica's eyes, blurring her vision of the scattered paper. She felt frozen, unable to bend down and pick it up, unable to meet the cold stare of the receptionist or the curious glances of the few onlookers who had paused to witness her degradation. The sleek, modern lobby suddenly felt like a cage, each polished surface reflecting her misery. The hope that had carried her here, that had pushed her through countless rejections, shriveled and died. "It's over," a voice whispered in her mind. "There's nothing left." The scent of expensive perfume, likely Tiffany's, seemed to choke her. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, and escape this awful moment. The receptionist, Tiffany, let out an exaggerated sigh. "Honestly, some people," she muttered, loud enough for Jessica and those nearby to hear, before turning back to her computer with an air of finality, as if Jessica no longer existed. The casual cruelty was breathtaking. There was no remorse, no flicker of empathy in her cold eyes, only impatience and a sense of superiority. Jessica felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The silence from the other people in the lobby was deafening. No one spoke up, no one offered a kind word or even a sympathetic glance. She was utterly alone in her shame. Slowly, as if moving through thick water, Jessica bent down to retrieve her resume. Her fingers fumbled with the paper, her hands shaking so much she could barely grasp it. Each second felt like an eternity, exposed and vulnerable on the cold floor. She could feel the heat in her cheeks, the sting of unshed tears. Just get out now, she urged herself. She didn't dare look back at Tiffany. She couldn't bear to see that smug, dismissive expression again. The carefully crafted document now seemed worthless, a testament to her failure, soiled by the indifference of this place. Once the resume was back in her trembling hand, Jessica turned, her shoulders slumped, her gaze fixed on the floor. She couldn't bring herself to meet anyone's eyes. The walk to the exit felt miles long, each step heavy with defeat. The bright, impersonal lights of the lobby seemed to mock her. She just wanted to be away from the scene of her humiliation, away from the cold stare of the receptionist and the silent judgment of the onlookers. The faint whir of the automatic doors opening as she approached was the only sound that registered in her daze. As she stumbled out of the imposing building and onto the busy sidewalk, the sounds of the city, car horns, distant sirens, the chatter of passers-by, rushed in, a stark contrast to the hushed tension of the lobby. The tears she had fought so hard to suppress finally welled up, hot and stinging, blurring the world around her. She fumbled in her pocket for a tissue, her breath catching in ragged sobs. The resume was still clutched in her hand, now crinkled and damp. Her hope, so bright just moments ago, was extinguished, leaving only a cold, aching despair as she fled from the building. Her resume a crumpled symbol of her pain, her quick retreat unnoticed by the impassive facade of Sterling Corp. Jessica found a small, slightly grimy bus stop bench, a short distance from Sterling Corp's gleaming entrance, sinking onto it heavily. The city noise was a dull roar in her ears, failing to drown out the sharp, replaying words of Tiffany Scott. "We sit or not hiring. I don't have time for this. You're blocking the reception area." Each phrase was a fresh stab of pain. She stared down at the crumpled resume in her lap. The carefully chosen words, the neatly formatted lines, now seeming like a cruel joke. "What was I thinking?" she berated herself. "Of course they wouldn't want someone like me." The polished edifice of Sterling Corp loomed in her peripheral vision, a monument to a world she clearly didn't belong in. The tears continued to fall, silent, angry tears of frustration and deep, aching hurt. She wiped them away impatiently with the back of her hand, but more followed. It wasn't just the rejection, it was the sheer unnecessary cruelty of it. The shove, the public humiliation, the utter lack of basic human decency, stung her deeply. She had encountered rude people before, faced countless closed doors in her job search, but this felt different, more personal, more demeaning. The memory of Tiffany's smug face, the coldness in her eyes, made Jessica shiver despite the mildness of the day. Why do people have to be like that? She wondered, the question echoing in the hollow space where her hope had been. She took a shuddering breath, trying to regain some semblance of control. "I can't fall apart here, on a public bench," she told herself sternly, but the weight of her situation pressed down on her. Months of unemployment had eroded her savings, and the rent was due soon. This job, any job, had been her lifeline. The desperation that had been a low hum in the background of her life now screamed in her ears. She felt so small, so utterly defeated. The faint scent of stale coffee and exhaust fumes from the street seemed to cling to her, a stark contrast to the expensive, clean air of the Sterling Corp lobby. It was a reminder of the gulf between her world and theirs. Meanwhile, back inside Sterling Corp, Mr. Alistair Harrison, the CEO, was walking through the main lobby on his way to an external meeting. He prided himself on being observant, on understanding the pulse of his company, right down to the atmosphere in the reception area. He was a man who valued respect and professionalism above almost all else. As he neared the main desk, he noticed a lingering tension in the air, a subtle discomfort on the faces of a few junior employees who were now studiously avoiding eye contact with the reception area. His gaze fell upon Tiffany Scott, who was idly filing her nails, a faint smirk still on her lips. Mr. Harrison's sharp eyes didn't miss Tiffany's self-satisfied posture, nor the slightly too loud, dismissive sigh she let out as she glanced towards the main entrance, where Jessica had just departed. He paused, his brow furrowing slightly, as something felt off. He prided himself on the welcoming and professional image Sterling Corp projected, and Tiffany's current demeanor struck a dissonant chord. He made a mental note. This was not the conduct he expected from his frontline staff. He believed first impressions were critical, and the reception desk was the very first impression many had of Sterling Corp. He approached a younger employee, Laura Walker, who was heading towards the elevators, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes betraying a hint of unease. "Miss Walker," Mr. Harrison said, his voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable air of authority. Laura started slightly, surprised to be addressed directly by the CEO. "Mr. Harrison," she replied, a little nervously. "Is everything all right out here? The atmosphere seems a little strained." His gaze was direct, and Laura felt compelled to be honest, though she hesitated, not wanting to cause trouble. She had seen the tail end of the interaction and witnessed the poor girl's distress. "There was a young woman here a few minutes ago, sir," Laura began, choosing her words carefully. She was asking about job applications at the reception desk. Laura glanced quickly towards Tiffany, who was now pretending to be engrossed in her computer screen, oblivious to the CEO's scrutiny. "And?" Mr. Harrison prompted, his eyes narrowing slightly as he followed Laura's gaze to Tiffany, then back. He noticed a faint scuff mark on the otherwise pristine floor near the desk, and a subtle, lingering scent of cheap paper mixed with the usual lobby fragrance. It was out of place. Laura took a shallow breath. "Well, sir," Miss Scott was quite abrupt with her. The young woman seemed very upset when she left. She dropped her resume. Laura gestured vaguely to the spot where Jessica had stumbled. Mr. Harrison's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Abrupt was one thing, causing genuine distress was another entirely. He valued initiative and hope in potential employees, not disdain from his current ones. He had a very low tolerance for arrogance and unkindness, especially towards those seeking opportunities. His gaze sharpened, sweeping the area where the interaction had evidently taken place, and he noted Tiffany's suddenly rigid posture, the way she studiously avoided looking in his direction. He didn't need a detailed report to understand that something inappropriate had occurred. The subtle clues, Laura's discomfort, Tiffany's defensive attitude, the lingering sense of a recent disturbance, painted a clear enough picture for him. He was a man of decisive action, and injustice, however small it might seem to others, always spurred him to act. He thanked Laura quietly, his mind already working. Mr. Harrison looked towards the main entrance, a thoughtful, almost stern expression on his face. He remembered a fleeting glimpse of a young woman with slumped shoulders hurrying out as he'd entered the lobby from the executive elevator bank. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, piecing things together, a sense of dismay settled in him. That is not how Sterling Corp treats people, he thought, his internal disapproval mounting. He made a swift decision. His external meeting could wait a few minutes. With determined strides, Mr. Harrison began walking towards the main entrance, his footsteps echoing with quiet authority on the polished marble floor. He intended to see if the distressed young woman was still nearby. Jessica was still on the bus stop bench, trying to discreetly wipe the last of her tears, when she saw a distinguished-looking man in an impeccably tailored suit walking directly towards her from the direction of Sterling Corp. Her first instinct was panic. "Oh no, are they sending security? Did I do something wrong by just sitting here?" She started to gather her crinkled resume, ready to flee again. The man was tall, with graying temples and a serious but not unkind expression. As he drew closer, she recognized the aura of quiet power, someone clearly important, and he stopped a few feet away from her. "Excuse me, miss," the man said, his voice surprisingly gentle yet firm. "I am Alistair Harrison, the CEO of Sterling Corp. I believe you were at our reception desk a few minutes ago?" Jessica's eyes widened. "The CEO?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. She could only nod, speechless, clutching her resume like a shield. "He knows," she thought, a fresh wave of dread washing over her. "He's going to tell me off too." She braced herself for another verbal assault, or perhaps a more polite, but equally firm, dismissal. She noticed he glanced briefly at the crumpled resume in her hands. Mr. Harrison's gaze was direct but not accusatory. "I was concerned to hear that your inquiry was not handled with the courtesy and professionalism I expect from my staff," he continued, his tone even. He then looked back towards the gleaming entrance of Sterling Corp., his expression momentarily hardening as he presumably thought of the incident at the reception. Jessica saw a flicker of something sharp in his eyes, a displeasure that was clearly directed at the earlier events, not at her. He did not explicitly mention Tiffany by name to Jessica, but his disapproval of the situation was palpable. He then turned his full attention back to Jessica, his expression softening slightly. "I understand you were looking for employment opportunities," Mr. Harrison said. Jessica, still stunned, found her voice, though it trembled. "Yes, sir. I was just asking if there were any openings, or if I could leave my resume." She gestured with the now pathetic-looking document. "The receptionist, she said you weren't hiring and that I should leave." Jessica hesitated, unsure if she should mention the shove, the outright rudeness. She didn't want to sound like she was complaining or making excuses, but the humiliation was still fresh. Mr. Harrison's perceptive gaze seemed to understand her hesitation. "I see," Mr. Harrison said, his voice betraying a note of controlled anger though not directed at her. He then asked, "May I see your resume?" Jessica hesitated for a fraction of a second before handing it over, feeling a blush creep up her neck, embarrassed by its crumpled state. He took it without comment on its condition, his eyes scanning the page quickly but thoroughly. Jessica watched him, her breath held. She saw his eyebrows raise slightly at one point, a flicker of interest perhaps. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant city traffic. "This is it," she thought. "He'll see I'm not qualified for anything at a place like Sterling Corp." After a few moments that felt like an eternity to Jessica, Mr. Harrison looked up, his expression thoughtful. "You have an interesting background, Miss Davis," he said, using her name from the resume. "Good grades, relevant volunteer experience, strong references listed here." Jessica blinked, surprised he'd found something positive. "Thank you, sir," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. The chaotic emotions inside her were slowly being replaced by a dawning, incredulous sense of disbelief. What was happening? This was the CEO taking time out of his day to speak to her, to look at her resume on a public street. Mr. Harrison continued, "What happened at my reception desk was unacceptable. That is not reflective of our company's values, and I will personally ensure it is addressed." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "At Sterling Corp., we value resilience, initiative, and the ability to remain composed under pressure. From what I witnessed and deduced, you shown remarkable composure in a difficult situation, even if you don't feel that way right now." Jessica felt a lump form in her throat. He wasn't just being polite, he seemed to genuinely see something in her, something beyond her current distress and worn clothing. "My executive assistant recently gave her notice," Mr. Harrison stated, his voice clear and decisive. "It's a demanding role that requires organization, discretion, and the ability to think on one's feet. It requires someone who is not easily deterred." He looked directly at Jessica, a keen intelligence in his eyes. Jessica's mind raced. His assistant? Could he possibly mean? It seemed too fantastical, too far-fetched after the morning she'd had. From the depths of despair to this, it was an emotional whiplash she could barely process. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought he might hear it. "Miss Davis," Mr. Harrison said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "I believe in giving people a chance, especially those who demonstrate character in the face of adversity. I also have a good instinct for people." He held her gaze. "The way you handled yourself just now, your determination even to approach Sterling Corp in the first place, tells me a great deal." He extended a hand towards her, not for the resume this time, but in a gesture of offering. The city sounds seemed to fade into the background as Jessica focused on his words. "Based on your qualifications and what I've seen of your tenacity, I am prepared to offer you the position of my executive assistant," Mr. Harrison declared, his voice calm but carrying the weight of a decision already made. Jessica stared at him, her mouth slightly agape, the earlier tears forgotten, replaced by sheer, unadulterated shock. "The position is yours, if you want it," he stated, his gaze direct and unwavering. This left Jessica, stunned by the sudden, unbelievable reversal of fortune. The crumpled resume still a stark reminder of the journey of the last 10 minutes.